think I can do the job. If I didn't, I wouldn't go to Pittsburgh. I wouldn't even play professional football if I didn't think I could move right in and do the job.
I think this film is a perfect example of that. Look what we found. And I felt you gotta keep this stuff. You don't throw it out. It's almost a sin. I said, don't throw anything out. Keep everything. Put it on a reel, put it away. Someday you'll use it. Someday is now. You're using it.
On that turn, somebody got me, man. God, did they hit me.
Almost the age 20 years that second half. Oh.
Last year, when we came up with the idea for Lost Treasures, I thought that maybe we'd find enough good footage that had never been seen on television to produce one show that covered our entire history from 1962 to the present. Well, we found enough for 5 shows, and we didn't even make it out of the 60s. So it's on to the 70s, and our research staff assured me that since NFL Films was increasing the amount of film we shot each season, our supply of Lost Treasures won't run dry anytime soon.
Come back.
Well, now I can admit that in the beginning, some of us weren't so sure that this idea would work.
At first, I wasn't so sure that it was such a great idea. I didn't know what you meant by lost treasures. Because to me, there are no lost treasures. It's all good film we've just kept in a library. I didn't know whether people would be that interested in how we made films and how we shot these things, which is basically what I think it's all about. When I look at them, I'm reliving NFL films, how it all started.
And you're a lost treasure.
I am a lost treasure. I have to agree with that. But I'm getting a big kick out of it, as long as my memory holds up.
Who could forget the styles of the 70s? It was a decade of bouffants and beehives. Look at that hairdo. It needs a building permit. Well, we found hours and hours of this kind of footage that was never used because, well, at the time, who knew how funny these clothes looked? We were all wearing this stuff. Even Tom Landry was. And Don Shula. In 1970, Flower Power gave the NFL a new look. New stadiums, new turf, new teams. The Steel Curtain meets Austin Powers. As I look at this, I realize that some of this stuff is really back in style. Look at this guy in the lavender jumpsuit. Wasn't he in that movie, The Big Lebowski? Of course, some were never really in fashion, like that halftime curse, "Up with people." Jeez, look at this. NFL owners, they even got in on the act. Now that's John Meekum of the Saints, and this is swinging Gene Klein of the Chargers. Even a grizzled old pro like Tommy Mason wore pink. And then there was all those beards and mustaches and sideburns. The mutton chop sideburn champion was Manny Fernandez of the Dolphins. Dave Costa represented the House of David. And the pretty boys with the shag cut sitting on the bench, that's Jack Snow and Lance Rensel. Bill Bradley, he favored the Leonard Skinner look. Did you ever have one of those nights when you just didn't want to go out, but your hair looked too good to stay home? Well, that's Pete Athos of the Giants. I first met Athos when he was playing for the minor league Norfolk Neptunes, and we were making a film about the Pottstown Firebirds. Athos was a hard hitter, and just as feisty was another skinny long hair named David Knight, who played wide receiver for the Jets. Knight had even prettier hair than Athos, and I always had this weird feeling that, I knew him from someplace. I finally figured out that he looked just like my 6th grade girlfriend. But of course, the Flower children hadn't completely taken over. Here's a guy who's neither grateful nor dead. There were some fans who didn't believe in all that peace and love stuff. On the field, the game was still played with that same edge. Maybe in 1970 it was even more competitive because it was the first season of the NFL-AFL merger. The two leagues had fought in the courts and the newspapers for a decade. But now they finally got their hands on each other for real. We wanted to show that the NFL was now one big happy family. So none of this saw the light of day. Can you imagine the fines and suspensions if this had happened now? It wasn't exactly a love-in for the fans either. How'd that song by the Youngbloods go? It was called Get Together. Come on, people now, smile on your brother. Everybody get together, try to love one another right now. Additional security was brought in to restore law and order. But it didn't stop this guy in the white t-shirt from kicking Dick Anderson of the Dolphins right in the butt. Look at that. We couldn't believe this shot when we found it, or the fact that, look at that, the guy seems to have gotten away with it. Nothing happens to him. Somewhere during that first season of the merger, it dawned on the players that they were in this thing together. What we thought would be a long, bloody, nasty transition started to go smoothly. And it amazed me that in less than a year, the AFL-NFL rivalry was really nothing more than a memory. By 1970, television was casting a lengthening shadow over the game. Instead of 4 or 5 video cameras at a game, the networks were using 8 or 10, and they were huge. We only had 2, so we could get closer to the action with cameras that were a lot smaller and we were more mobile. Early handheld TV cameras looked like something from the space program. They were big and bulky, and their electronic images had to be transmitted through miles and miles of cable. All our guys needed was a belt battery and a roll of film. They could move quickly into position for plays like these. None of these shots were used back then, but I love the fact that the techniques our cameramen mastered 30 years ago are the same techniques that we use today. And amazingly, some of the same guys who got these shots are still shooting for us. Ernie Ernst, Howard Neef, Phil Tuckett, and Bob Smith. You know, some production companies today deliberately stain and scratch old footage. It's like an effect. They think it makes it look more authentic. Well, we let our film play in all its original full color. Look at this. No scratches, no dirt. Can you believe these shots are 30 years old? But maybe you noticed that this montage was made up mostly of running plays. You see, pass coverage, that was a different story. Keeping focus on a ball in flight was a real challenge. Trying to keep the ball in frame, well, that was just as hard. If the pass was in frame and in focus, you still could miss the catch. But our ground cameramen were persistent, and for every 10 we missed, we captured one beauty. There it is, a tight spiral against the autumn sky, and a fundamental element of the NFL film style was born.
So they had that down pretty good, that spiraling football, which has become, I guess, our trademark. I used to go to some meetings, and I'd see some network men stand around a television set and they'd see that spiraling ball, and I heard one say to the other, how do those guys do that? How do they keep that in focus? How do they follow focus on that? And I thought that was pretty good.
Back then, the 400mm telephoto lens was never used to follow passes or runs. We believed it was only good for isolation and those selected details, and it might have stayed that way, except for a fluke.
Originally, the only time we used the long telephoto lenses is when we were doing an ISO coverage or a wiring. And we had one of the referees by the name of Gallagher. We had him wired. We set up the camera. The sound man was right next to me. As soon as I turned the camera on, the sound would go shh. So I'm sitting here in the end zone. I got a whole bunch of film and a camera and a long lens. I figured, well, what the hell? I'll shoot some game action. So I start shooting shots of the quarterback's face and the linemen and all that sort of stuff, and followed some game action. By the time I got to the end of the game, I was as frustrated as I could be. I was talking to myself. I mean, how difficult it was to try and do that. And I brought it back, and I was apologetic to the editors and everything else, and I went out and got a couple beers. I was really disgusted. Well, the film was there. They figured what the hell to develop it. And damn, we had something that no one's ever seen before. We didn't get every one, but boy, the ones we got were special.
Ernie went on to develop his own unique style with the telephoto lens, including that ball in the air shot, only it got much tighter. Ernie's most famous shot was the Immaculate Reception by Franco Harris, but believe it or not, that's not his favorite.
I got a shot one time. The ball was thrown and it was coming through the air, and like we say in NFL, you could read the writing on the ball, and it comes down and it's in super slow, and you see two hands come up and the ball goes into the hands, and the guy brings it down to his face. Best shot I ever made. Nowadays, we'll be sitting watching television or something, no matter who I'm with, you know. That's my shot. I made that. You know, it's gotten to a point now when I'm with my wife, she'll say, oh, shut up, I know that. You know? But, yeah, I love to see that old stuff. That's why I'm so glad that they're going for these hidden treasures now. You know, there's a lot of my stuff in there that I never had before. I enjoy it, and I'm going to get on film and get a copy of every one of them so I can see every shot. Yeah.
In 1970, a few of the original stadiums were still in use. The old ballparks had a distinctive charm, but that was lost with the arrival of that other example of 70s bad taste, the dual-purpose stadium. Now, for some reason, they all seem to be built by a river. Riverfront Stadium, Three Rivers Stadium. They all looked exactly the same. Cold, drab, and designed for both football and baseball. We hated them immediately.
Somebody came up with a bright idea that they're going to save the city's money. We're going to give you 2 for 1. You're going to get a stadium where you can see baseball and you can see football. Well, it sounded pretty good. You're going to save hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, it never worked out that way. The seats were so far away from the action. It's coming back to a separate football field and a separate baseball. So who are all these geniuses that were going to save money? You know, I always say cheap is cheap.
For the old guys, this was a troubling time, leaving comfortable and familiar playing fields for something that was so I can't even say the word, so synthetic. The times, they were changing. Pro football was becoming big business, and the new stadiums, they made financial sense. But still, the passing of 3 yards in a cloud of dust was sad for all of us. The new surface set off heat waves and kept everybody clean, but it was so sterile. From the press box, these fields were interchangeable. They had those ugly seams for the baseball cutouts. I suppose the game on artificial turf was faster, but to me, it seemed sort of sacrilegious. Some people pointed out that natural grass fields were not consistent, and that made footing unpredictable. But the plastic stuff was just plain slippery, and when it snowed, it turned into an ice rink. They said mud baths would be a thing of the past. But the puddles were just as deep, only cleaner. Shooting in the rain was still our toughest challenge, but instead of being rewarded with classic footage of players slogging through the mud, we ended up with a lot of this, hydroplaning. But the biggest misconception was that people said AstroTurf would actually cut down on injuries. Well, that wasn't true. The players who were getting body slammed into these concrete floors, they didn't buy the theory then, and they don't buy it now. In Dallas, they went for something totally different. A stadium with a sunroof. A Dallas executive, I think it was Tex Schramm, said, "We built it this way so God could look down and root for the Cowboys." What it did was create a shadow nightmare for our cameramen. Shots we never missed were now unusable. The design of all the new stadiums caused shadow problems for us. Look at this touchdown run by the Bears' Bobby Douglas. It was in Atlanta, and it was ruined by 4 exposure changes. Add to this an increasing number of late starts for television doubleheaders, and those shadows turned into a black hole that swallowed up hundreds of great shots. Another new stadium that opened in 1970 was San Francisco's Candlestick Park. Now, it wasn't so much that I disliked Candlestick, it's just that I really loved Kezar. That's the stadium the 49ers left behind. To me, Kezar was the perfect place to play football. Good sight lines, it was intimate, and was right in the city. A lot like Franklin Field, where I watched the Eagles when I was a kid. Kezar was a neighborhood stadium. Fans walked to the games. It was 4 blocks from Haight-Ashbury and 1 mile from the Golden Gate Bridge. Kezar had it all. It had tradition, character, atmosphere, and some damn good players.
64 from Oregon, Dave Wilcox. At middle linebacker, number 57 from Michigan, Frank Nunley.
Frank Nunley, number 57, was the middle linebacker of the last 49er team to play in Kezar. And his nickname was one of my all-time favorites, Fudge Hammer.
Sitting across the line from Joe Namath or Johnny Unitas, and they'd wink at you and they go, "Fudge Hammer, Fudge Hammer." You know, just to kind of get you going. I was a prime example that you didn't have to have a beautiful body to play in the National Football League, because I was always a little pudgy, but Stan Hyman said I was a sweet guy off the field and hit like a hammer on the field. So he named me Fudge Hammer. It was nice to have somebody with not the greatest body in the world that was still a pretty good player, and the average guy could identify to me.
Typically, San Francisco handled the demise of Kezar with class. Today, the old scoreboards and some of the stands remain, and Kezar lives on as a city park that honors its past.
And what a great place. Look at this. This area around here is just, phenomenal. And then, of course, the flower children were in full bloom back in the late 60s and early 70s. This was the Haight-Ashbury district. This was the most famous show place in the world where everybody could come and get angel dust and get themselves blown out. And there's probably still a few laying around here someplace. Kezar Stadium was definitely a San Francisco treat. There was 48,000 people that came to every game. If 98% of the people in the world are sane and you have a 2% lunatic fringe, We got that 2% here all the time. You know, everybody that came here was a different type of a dude, if you ever met him. We used to come out through a tunnel. They had this big chicken wire, a big wire screen over the top of the tunnel, and I was standing next to John Brody and said, "Hey, what's that chicken wire?" And he says, "You'll find out." About 2 minutes later, 3 or 4 guys threw a beer bottle off and broke it over the chicken wire. Everybody knew not to stand next to John when you're getting introduced. But we had some really great battles here on this field. We were actually very disappointed that we were going to have to go to Candlestick, to be honest with you, because, you know, in 1970, we played Dallas right here, and the last game ever played here, to go to see who was going to be in the Super Bowl. We really wanted to come back and play here a couple more seasons so that we could get to that Super Bowl out of this stadium. And when we got over to Candlestick Park, we were kind of disappointed because it was supposed to be this fancy AstroTurf, and what it turned out to be was just pure, solid cement. We were playing on cement. You could tell from the first day that we set foot on it that it was not good for football. So the game was played higher. It was played about 6 inches higher, so as opposed to, you know, running down low and getting a hit on somebody and rolling into the dirt, you were rolling on cement, and it would just, the whole game was just played differently. Kezar was a football stadium, and Candlestick was a baseball stadium that was altered to play football. I always would envision that maybe San Francisco might come back and put this thing back together. You never know, with all the new theme parks and everything going on. Well, I enjoyed playing football here at Kezar Stadium, and football was a little bit different back then. There wasn't as much money involved. I think we had a heck of a lot more fun. Most of the people I talk to today say it's turned into a business. And this certainly wasn't a business for any of us guys that were playing at that time.
So you'd keep things the way they were, or would you like to switch places?
No, I'd like to make some more money.
One stadium that didn't change was Green Bay's Lambeau Field. But the 1970 Packers were far removed from the glory days of the 60s. Most of the legends on those championship teams were now in street clothes, and they had returned to honor Bart Starr, who had led them to 5 world championships. A teary-eyed Starr knew his best days were behind him, but he didn't expect the disaster that followed. His first pass was intercepted by Myron Patios, and it was all downhill from there. 5 sacks, 2 picks, and a 31-21 defeat by the Rams. Bart Starr Day turned so ugly that we didn't have the heart to use any of this footage at the time. Starr was soon in street clothes himself as coach of the Packers, and that didn't end well either. Another great in civvies was Joe Willie Namath, sidelined by his damaged knees. And when he did dress, that stiff-legged gait set him up for even more punishment. It was painful to watch. The charisma was still there, but by the early 70s, the greatness was gone. We found this unusual shot of a fan who tried to storm the field in Chicago to berate Namath before he was restrained. You know, actually, the facts were on this guy's side. After winning Super Bowl III, Joe never again defeated a team with a winning record. He had a streak in the 70s when he threw an interception in 20 straight games, and he had the second most interceptions returned for touchdowns in NFL history. Dan Marino has the most. Still, as far as I'm concerned, Joe Namath deserves his spot in the Hall of Fame for his skill, daring, and that one big win. As the great QBs of the 60s stepped down, the Steelers' Art Rooney found one who would take their place.
There's the blonde bomber.
Red 33.
Terry Bradshaw was a big, strapping kid from Louisiana Tech brought in by Pittsburgh to end the losing.
He's going to go bald. Do you think that'll bother him in about 10 more years? He's going to lose his hair. Huh? He'll get a transplant, Arthur. Bradshaw's getting bald. Bradshaw's starting to get bald.
Golly, could nothing be greater happen to Terry Bradshaw than to go up to Pittsburgh and make Pittsburgh a winner. Team from 1-13, change it around, make it 13-1, 14. You know, make him a winner. Could open the door for myself as far as my business career is concerned. But mainly for the Pittsburgh Steelers, that's what we're interested in. That's why I'm going up there, is to make them a winner.
Terry Bradshaw was the first pick in the 1970 draft, and we brought him to Philadelphia for his first national interview.
You're in a medium shot?
Louis Schmidt was the director that day, and he's still with us 30 years later.
We arranged for Terry Bradshaw to come to Philadelphia, where our studios were, obviously. He was really a delightful guy. He had no guys at all. He had nothing in front of him.
Do you think you look like a quarterback?
I don't know what they look like.
We're used to being dealing with people who are a little more guarded and public relations conscious.
Living in the city of Pittsburgh didn't exactly one of my goals in life.
Back then, he just let it rip, and he didn't care what he said, and we knew we had something hot. We knew we had a good interview, and we just let him talk.
This long hair and guys dressed up like girls. These kind of things that really make America, to me, it just makes it ugly, as they call the ugly American.
What's on his mind is on his tongue. Whatever came into his head, he said it.
And I hadn't seen too much of the long hair stuff, and this guy did have long, curly hair. You know, wild-looking clothes and everything, putting his makeup on me. Thought maybe I ought to call him Bruce or something, you know.
From there, we drove to Franklin Field, which at the time was the site of where the Eagles played football. The funny thing is that I had told Mo Kelman, our cameraman, who back then was in his 70s, and he was supposed to get Terry throwing some passes. And I kind of, all of a sudden, I noticed that Mo Kelman has been trained so long to follow the football that he's following the ball to me catching it. And I had to say, Mo, no, you don't need to get me. Stay on Terry. So we had Terry on film now as a football player, but we needed some other stuff. So I got my wife, she was young at the time, and she was a beautiful girl, and Terry thought she was real pretty, he kept telling me, and she was dressed all in white, and we had the two of them, this beautiful young couple, walking around Penn, and he bought her flowers at a flower stand. We shot that.
I'd like to introduce the #1 draft choice of the National Football League, Terry Bradshaw.
He was a big playful kid.
That was such a good take.
And about 5 years after this, when he won the Super Bowl, we brought him in to do a commercial for the Super Bowl. And he got off the plane, and he had kind of a straight face, no recognition, none of the warmth that I had come to associate with him. And I said, what's the problem? And he said, nothing, let's get this thing done. He was all business. And basically, he told me that he barely remembered his trip to Philadelphia 5 years before that.
The music being played in NFL stadiums was definitely not in tune with the 1970s. The Packers' lumberjack band was still playing melodies that had Curly Lambeau tapping his toe. The game was moving forward, but most marching bands were stuck in place. Now, this classic lost treasure reminds me of a line from the song American Pie. The players tried to take the field. The marching band refused to yield. The day the music died. But I don't think this marching band music will ever die. It'll always be part of football. Thankfully, the 70s did bring a change of rhythm. Sunday with Soul had arrived. I loved those black college bands from Grambling and Southern and the way they breathed new life into a tired old format.
Hey, down!
And these bands symbolized the emergence of an increased African-American influence in the National Football League. On on the field and up in the stands. This was the Superfly generation. Deacon Jones told me that there was an unspoken quota that existed in the 1960s, and it limited the number of black players to 6 per team. Whether or not that was true, black players in the NFL did increase in the 1970s. The only problem seemed to be severe cases of helmet hair.
Frenchie!
The Pittsburgh Steelers drafted Franco Harris, Mean Joe Green, Mel Blount, L.C. Greenwood, Lynn Swann, John Stallworth, and traded for a flashy little tailback named John Frenchie Fuqua, number 33. Fuqua still holds the Steelers' single-game rushing record, and he was always a long-distance threat. But his heroics were overshadowed by a greater claim to fame. Frenchie had the wildest wardrobe in the NFL, which was saying something in the 1970s. We looked through our entire film library, but these stills were all that we could find to verify the legend. So we took a trip to Detroit to see if Frenchie could still fit into some of his outfits 30 years after the fact. It was raining like hell outside. It was a real Midwestern thunderstorm. And we did our best to turn Frenchie's living room into a disco inferno.
Can you believe it?
We don't have a motorized ball. I mean, this is definitely disco or low-tech disco. Yeah.
I mean, if I walked in there, I wouldn't even know this was my living room. You guys made a transition here.
Action? What was this, Frenchie? What outfit was this?
This was my Pancho Villa outfit. And the only thing I regret is I haven't got my sombrero and my little round sunglasses. It was a deadly look I had in this outfit, there's no doubt about it.
Okay, next costume. Come on out. Oh, wow.
Okay, can you believe it? Can you believe it? I mean, come on. I mean, why do we have to have the ladies have all the advantages? Before I left Pittsburgh, you could even see a few businessmen walking along, going to work with purses. My chapstick could go in here. My eighth bandage could go in here. All of the advantages that women had. Now, listen, I'm not on that side of the fence, but why shouldn't we share too? This was my get serious outfit. Superfly, no smile. I even had a black hat that I broke down. I mean, that was Humphrey Bogart to the max in those days. Hitman, if you want to call it outfit. Although my hits took place on the football field. JFF, John Frenchie Fuqua. Everyone in Pittsburgh can say Fuqua. Hey, qu'est-ce que c'est, s'il vous plaît? What was my pay? What was my reward? Ah, ooh, my job was done. I had been paid. I enjoyed it.
What's this one? What's going on out there?
Thunder, lightning, of which I used to hitchhike. Pay no attention to it. Just a little Midwest storm out there. What you have here is one of my all-time favorites. This is my caveman outfit. When you leave training camp, you are in the best shape of your life. I felt invincible when I came out of training camp. I didn't believe I could get hurt. I didn't believe no one could catch me. I was just a madman at that time. Just to be able to get into this today lets me know that there's hope for me. The gods have spoken. We just had a major storm here. I think that was close. Listen, let me just tell you something. It was the reflexes of my muscles, but I felt something strange and like, I mean, hey, believe me, either clean, but like, hey, I am showing my true colors here. I mean, come on. That lightning was awful close.
In the 1970s, entertainers began showing up on NFL sidelines. Hugh O'Brien was a Rams fan, and James Garner favored the Raiders. Jazz trumpeter Al Hirt was part owner of the New Orleans Saints. Now, if you are under 50, you won't know who this guy is. Tennessee Ernie Ford, who had a big hit called 16 Tons. Phyllis Diller showed up, looking like a guy in drag. Comedian Flip Wilson was a guy in drag, playing his alter ego, Geraldine. We were excited when we found this great shot of Tony Bennett at Kezar Stadium singing "I Left My Heart in San Francisco." Only one problem. We can't let you hear it, because we'd have to pay rights fees, we'd have to pay publishing fees, composer fees, performance fees, BMI, ASCAP, they'd all come after us. So you know the song, hum along, and we'll save 25 grand. Also, we can't let you hear Jim Nabors singing the national anthem, which may not be such a bad idea. But we are allowed to use 10 seconds of the anthem. So we'll let Johnny Mathis finish up. There were other interesting characters on the sidelines. I know Abraham, Cleveland field goal chaser and fan extraordinaire, appeared in last year's Lost Treasures, but this new shot was so good, we just couldn't leave it out. On the field, the Browns had some memorable names like tight end Chip Glass and wide receiver Fair Hooker, number 43. The Broncos were headed for the promised land, led by Haven Moses, number 25. Then there were the animal nicknames, Spider Lockhart of the Giants and the Rabbit, Billy Ray Smith in Baltimore. Tom Casanova loved Cincinnati, and Happy Feller was pleased to be kicking for the Eagles. Then there were the runners, Don Nottingham, the Baltimore Bowling Bull, Bill Earthquake Enyart, who shook the ground briefly in Buffalo, and there's Tank Holmes rumbling into the end zone. Maybe you recognize this player in a different context. He played Apollo Creed in the Rocky movies, but back then, he was an Oakland Raider linebacker named Carl Weathers. This next guy played a bigger part in my life. He was an All-American tight end for the Eagles named Steve Zabel, spelled with a Z. The fact that our names sounded so much alike, we both lived in Philly, and we were in the football business, caused some confusion. And more than once, I saw the look of disappointment on the face of a blind date who thought she was going out with the rich first-round draft choice of the Eagles and got me instead. It's turned around, though. Steve told me recently that he's been getting compliments on the great job that he's been doing hosting those shows on ESPN Classic about the lost treasures of the NFL. We also found a treasure trove of head coaches that were anonymous assistants. Now, who knew about Marv Levy when he ran the special teams for Washington and Philadelphia? And who could have predicted back then he'd take Buffalo to 4 Super Bowls? On Don Shula's sideline in Baltimore,
John Unitas.
Chuck Noll was prepping for his Super Bowl victories with the Steelers. Here, we're trying to get a shot of Bengal head coach Paul Brown, and this damn assistant kept getting in the way. Well, we didn't know at the time, but Bill Walsh would himself become a Hall of Fame head coach. Check out this shot of the young assistant in the dark glasses. That's Buddy Ryan. This backup quarterback from the 49ers also went on to be a celebrated head coach, but not in the NFL, Steve Spurrier.
Steve, of course, is the most successful college football coach in the last 10 years right now. He's got more wins than anybody. And if you ever talk to Steve about the biggest failure that he's ever been was playing pro football, he just really felt that he didn't motivate himself like he would have liked to. He'd make up his own plays out on the field, and that really pissed the coaches off a lot. Steve was always he always thought he could do it better than anybody else. And of course, he's proven to himself, to everybody else, that he can. But he couldn't do it on the professional football field.
Hey, speaking of great names, number 46 of the Vikings, that's Irsel McBee.
Come on, Frank, do something. What the hell? You're standing there not doing anything. What the hell is it? Send him out for chicken or something. You know, Phil, that I was always a nut for equipment. I loved the equipment more than anything else. I used to spend more time going over the cameras and the recorders and the microphones. It's amazing, the transformation of the tape decks. Everything with digital and computerization. I would have had a lot of fun with this stuff. I might have had too much fun. I'd have been buying everything there is.
As the 70s began, we were still experimenting with ways to get better sideline sound. This big, long mic was a little impractical for use in the bench area. Again, we opted for smaller, more mobile equipment.
Turn right around, turn right around.
We needed to move quickly because teams started assigning a trainer or an equipment guy to chase us off, to get us out of the bench area.
Man.
It's gonna be green!
Down this restraining line here now. This little broken line here.
Yeah, we're with the National Football League.
Yeah. Get back over the other side of that line.
Y'all move out with the camera back behind you.
Now, as soon as they do this, as soon as they go motion like this, hey, get out! Hey.
But we always snuck right back in, and when the coaches finally realized that we weren't going to go away, they reluctantly let us stay. We were there so often that the players got to know us.
You checking us out with this camera here?
For many years, I shot the bench camera.
Steve, how you been doing? How you been doing, Steve? I ain't seen you in a long time.
Joe, what's that red arm game?
That's a little kid game in San Diego.
Players came to know me and trust me, and they knew I wouldn't make them look bad.
If it was 84, don't get that on print, please.
Don't say anything. Don't say anything.
I hate these guys because you can't cuss.
Yes, you can. Say anything.
Yeah, but y'all use it. That's...
No,
Crap! Some of that we can't use. That is a team! That is a team!
This special access gave us the chance to document the era's greatest teams and greatest players in moments of unguarded intensity.
Come on, Gus, go shaft, get one.
When I heard him moves, man, I made him quit. You probably missed this one, too. Hey! Hey! Dude! All right, now get in there. Let's take that son of a in.
You ever clung one on them?
Come on, D's. Play your game now. Play it. Hang on him close. Billy, stay up here.
Knock him down now, okay? Knock your outside men down.
Knock it in there to me, somebody did.
Pick it up! Get the ball! Louis, we'll take 3. How much time they got? Golly! I can catch a nap in there. Hey, what's on that turn? Somebody got me, man. God, did they hit me? Should have got it in, man. That's all right, man. Should have got it in.
What happened up the middle, Eve? What happened on that last play up the middle?
That's the third bad call, damaging call he's made on us today. And you know where his home is? No, Baltimore. With Don Shue.
Wendell! Tucker!
Wendell!
Tucker! Come on, Tony Khan! Come on, Danny! Come on! Dig in, babies! Let's go, Rocky!
Come on, Bobby.
Jethro! Get him, get him, get him, get him! Come on now! Gotta win!
Blitz him, anything!
Let's get it up!
You wrap him up, baby. You wrap him up.
Hit his ass! Come on, Bubba! Come on, don't give him that point! Find the hole! Find the hole! Win, Smitty, win!
I don't think
There's some ice on there. No.
It ain't bad. It ain't bad.
All right.
It's just a little pull.
All right, okay. It's not even a pull, Rabbit. It's Charlie horse.
Just a Charlie horse?
Charlie horse. There is no pull.
They got Lou ready to go, so you just take it easy, Rabbit. I'm gonna hold you out for a while. Here.
Hey, I just want to say football coverage here.
One thing different about the 1970s was the lack of NFL merchandise being worn by the fans. Now, what's wrong with this picture? Well, compare these crowd shots to today's color-coordinated stadiums. The early 1970s marked the emergence of NFL properties, the marketing division of the league office. Fans still wore their hearts on their sleeves, but now those sleeves were the colors of their favorite teams.
Football colors, football souvenirs, football colors.
This was when I first started to realize that the game I loved was becoming a business.
Hey, cowboy, souvenirs, pennants, hats, what are you gonna have?
Souvenir programs, get your land out right here.
But to tell you the truth, I kind of ignored all that. To me, the NFL has always been as basic and as beautiful as this 2-yard run by the Bears' Ross Montgomery. 1970 was a year of transition, from the cozy old ballparks to the gleaming new sports palaces. But that really didn't change the game any. No matter where pro football is played, no matter what the season, the basic values that make the game great never change. Courage, pride, and a love that's shared by the players and the fans of the National Football League.
This NFL Films production has been brought to you by the National Football League. The NFL is online at www.nfl.com.